Now in year number 4, it's a Yank on the Footy with Craig Wessels. Let's all sit back and enjoy a chat about the greatest game on the face of the earth. Thanks for tuning in, everybody.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 273 of A Yank on the Footy. I'm Craig Wessels, coming to you from Sandusky, Ohio, and, well, it's kind of an interesting day for me because it's a day that I wasn't sure was ever going to arrive, but am pretty darned happy that it has arrived. Today I turned 60, and I am, quite frankly, ecstatic about being 60. I know a lot of people tend to get a little anxious when they change that first digit of their age over to the next one. Now, to be completely fair, when and if I get the opportunity to do that again, when it changes to a 7, I might get a little bit more concerned about it. But at this point in time, I'm ecstatic about turning 60. And kind of a strange reasoning behind that. But I on my dad's side of the family, my grandfather passed away at age 69, smoked and drank a great deal. My father passed away at 59 in October of 2001, drank and smoked and worked countless hours for Ford Motor Company. 49, quite frankly, scared the hell out of me. So once I reached that point and got past there and reached 50, I thought, okay, that's not so bad. I couldn't wait to turn 60 because that way I knew that I had surpassed his lifespan. Now, I don't smoke, I don't drink. If you've followed me on Twitter, I did put an image up there today that kind of shows a headshot of present day me and me 22, 23 months ago, and over 68 kilos ago as well, about 150 pounds here in the U.S. I'm feeling pretty darn good. I'm not going to say I feel terrific, but I feel pretty darn good for somebody who's 60 and no longer weighs what I previously weighed. And I'm doing this, one, because it's the healthy, right thing for me to do, and I finally made a decision to do it. Had a little bit of a health scare a couple years ago, and I'm feeling pretty darn good. But again, I'm also hoping to make that trek to Australia next footy season to go see some AFL footy, as well as hoping to see some local footy and visit some local footy clubs while I am in the country as well. It's why I'm working as many hours as I am at a summer job at the local amusement park. And I've not been doing as many review episodes of games as I would like to because I've not been able to watch every game over the last few weeks since my summer job has begun. And it's been hectic, but it's also been, I don't want to say it's an evil, but it's kind of a necessary evil because if I want to get to Australia next year, I need to put some more money in the bank in order to be able to cover the cost of that. So that's why I am working. I've now set aside about a third of my airline ticket so far. I do want to give Tim Althred a huge thank you. He put a post on Twitter, made a contribution, actually made 2 contributions on my Buy Me a Coffee page, which I think one of them said, let's get me to Australia to watch footy in person. So, Tim, I want to thank you for that, man. I truly appreciate that. It was most generous, and I'm not, if you want to, as I say in many episodes, if you want to help out the podcast, you can certainly do that through the Buy Me a Coffee page or through my Redbubble store page. I do have a couple of new items that are on there as well. One that I definitely want to get a shirt made up for myself. There's an Essendon supporter that put a comment on Twitter a couple of months back that said, "You have to be the coolest bloke in America." And I think I need to put that on a t-shirt, or at least a sweatshirt. So I get some great advertising for the podcast. But enough about that. like I said, I'm walking the equivalent of about 60 to 65 kilometers each week at work at the amusement park. I'm doing a mindless job, but I'm enjoying it because I teach school. It's nice to have a job where I can just walk away at the end of the shift and know I'm done. I don't have papers to grade or lessons to plan, that type of thing. I'm traveling between the two different parking lots at this amusement park, and I'm emptying trash cans. Now, I have 2 bachelor's degrees and a master's degree, and I'm not above doing that sort of thing. I like the mindless aspect of it. I think it's a nice way to just get through the day, and they're paying me to get my steps in, to do a lot of walking. So it's a win-win. I'm busting my butt for them, and they're paying me to get my steps in. So it's working out for both of us. I've seen a few too many snakes because we have a lot of water snakes here in Sandusky along the lake shore. I've seen lots and lots of them. They're harmless. They're big, but they're harmless. But still not a huge fan of snakes. Not deathly afraid of them like my father was, however. So, again, enough about that. Let's move on to episode 273. I am absolutely stoked to be bringing this discussion with you. I sat down a couple of weeks ago with the legendary Col Hutchinson, who spent over 2 decades as the official historian of the VFL and AFL. Just a great storyteller. I cannot thank Barry Cheatley enough, the North Melbourne legend, for putting me in touch with Mr. Hutchinson. Barry, I tip my cap to you, fine sir, for this. I truly, truly appreciate it. Now, folks, don't forget that if you want to get your local footy club getting a shout-out during an upcoming episode, drop me an email at yankonthefooty@gmail.com. Reach out on any of my socials, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. I do spend a lot of my time on Twitter at Yank_on or over on Facebook. You can find me, Craig Wessels, or Yank on the Footy podcast as well. And today's club of the episode are the East Geelong Eagles of the Geelong District Football League. And the Eagles were formed back in 1879, and they play their games at the Richmond Oval in East Geelong, which I find interesting because there's actually something Richmond-related that it's made its way to Geelong. They even named an oval after them. You see how interesting that is? Richmond in Geelong. Richmond in Geelong. See, it can happen. Now, it's not going to happen, but it can happen. Yes, one last little dig at the Tigers there and the difficulty of finding their way down the M1. Now, based on what I've been able to ascertain from their website, the club has won at different levels of footy 34 different premierships throughout their history, including their reserve side winning last year in 2022. Now, this Saturday, the club travels to the Oswide Plumbing and Civil Oval to face off against Corio. And later that evening, the club is hosting their EGFNC ball upstairs at the West End with entertainment by Just James. I believe tickets would have already had to been purchased by now, but they're going to have full drink menu and canapes and that sort of thing. It sounds like a grand time. I do also want to give a quick shout out to a couple of Eagles juniors, Levi Hayes and Abel Foley, for reaching 50 games in a game a couple of weeks ago. And I want to wish the Eagles the absolute best of luck the rest of the way through 2023. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump into my chat with Col Hutchinson. Just an absolutely fascinating gentleman, and I'm so glad that I was able to sit down and talk with him. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I am beyond thrilled to have my guest with me today. He is an absolute legend in the world of Australian rules football. He spent over 20 years as the official historian of the VFL, AFL, and I think I can safely say that between 1963 and 2019, you knew exactly where he was on at least 22 or 23 specific days of each one of those years. I am absolutely thrilled to welcome Col Hutchinson to the podcast. Thank you, sir, for coming on today. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it too. I'm sure we'll enjoy our conversation.
Yes, I mean we've had a great talk off air already beforehand, and you gave me a couple of wonderful stories. We were talking about a dear gentleman, Barry Cheatley, a little bit there, and Barry, if you're listening, he did mention something about the blue in the race, which did people actually come to blows at the end of this game that you were referencing?
They did indeed. The poor North Melbourne coach finished up with a blood nose, And it was administered by a Geelong player at the time who was an off-duty policeman.
Oh, wow. Wow. So did he go on duty then arrest himself?
There were threats by various North Melbourne people to report him to the police administration to have him sacked, but that didn't happen.
Wow. And that is something that the game has certainly changed, that since you've been watching it in your lifetime. And I've seen footage. Somebody sent me links to some footage of Neil Baum the other day when he's playing with the Tigers, and just quite frankly, just turning around and punching somebody's lights out during the course of the game. And it's like, what? I didn't do anything. And it's amazing that the game was like that. And is the kind of the little pushing and shoving that happens before the first bounce, or after a goal is scored, is that kind of the residue of that kind of contact? Because that certain type of thing would not stand at all anymore. But are those little pushes and shoves kind of what we have now as a result of that, or in place of it?
Partly, I would say that is the case, and also the pushing and shoving, as you've just described it, is just designed to try to put the player off his game and to make him, or to try to make him lose concentration.
Okay.
And talking about Neil Baum, the classic case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Off the field, you wouldn't find a gentler soul.
Mm-hmm.
Once he crossed the white line, it was a different story.
Well, and I guess I this is something that I've talked to many more players who played in the 1960s and 1970s and that sort of thing than I have present day players. In fact, I got the 3 Cats that were drafted from the Geelong Falcons last year. I got them in a little bit of hot water because I reached out to them on social media, and they came on the podcast all at the same time. And I had somebody from the Cats front office reach out to me like, how did you get in touch with them? And I said, well, I just reached out to them on social media. And they're like, oh, they can't do that. We need to talk to them about that. They're not allowed to do that. But, I've not talked to a lot of present day players, but you have to wonder that, while you may have had, the players from Richmond and Hawthorn, and well, maybe not Geelong so much, but especially the ones that were in Melbourne, some of these people had to have worked jobs where they were working side by side with one another, but were playing on different clubs. There had to be some sort of instance where that clash, carried over into the real job, if you will.
Absolutely. A classic example of that was the legendary Collingwood coach, Jock McHale, who was a foreman at what is now Carlton and United Brewery in Melbourne.
Okay.
And many of the people who worked under him were league footballers from various clubs. And there was a classic situation in 1938 when Carlton and Collingwood were due to play in the grand final.
Uh-huh.
And Jock had some Carlton players under his control at the brewery.
Uh-oh.
And he deliberately put them on night shift on the Friday prior to the grand final. But the whole move backfired because the Blues were too good for the Magpies that day.
Okay. Well, I didn't know if maybe he put them on the night shift and had them work as taste testers, quality control.
They wouldn't have taken much encouragement to do that, no doubt.
That makes, it makes complete sense that he did that, and fortunately for Carlton that worked out to their benefit. But before we get into talking a little bit more about footy, I want to go all the way back to early in your career, because as I mentioned to you off air, I've been a school teacher for now going on 30 years, but you began your professional career, as best I can tell, as a school teacher. And tell us about your time as a teacher, because I love hearing the stories about people who got involved and made the decision to get involved in that profession.
Yes, well, I started my career as a teacher in 1964, teaching in a number of country schools around Victoria, and then settled into a role at the Highton Primary School in the Geelong region, and was there for nearly 20 years in that situation, and had the pleasure of actually teaching some children of then current Geelong players.
Outstanding.
So Ken Newland and Wayne Closter had children at the school, and I took delight in staying in regular contact with them. And then it was when I became the match day statistician at Geelong Footy Club in 1975, when Polly Farmer was coaching there, that I started taking a real interest in the history side of things, as well as gathering match stats on Saturdays. And that I was sort of conducting the two roles, that role at Geelong at weekends and even at training nights, as well as doing the teaching. And then out of the blue in 1992, I received a call from one of the key administrators at the league, asking if I would be interested in taking on the role full time as the AFL statistician and historian. So I immediately resigned from teaching and took that up.
Well, that had to be a tough decision, giving up something that you loved, but you were also going to something that you loved just as much, and it had become a more recent passion with you as well. But how do you, as the historian, how do you go about compiling all of that information? Did you then set up directives that you sent out to all of the different clubs that said, provide me with XYZ in terms of information and send that to me in triplicate or that sort of thing? Or how did you go about compiling all of these things?
Well, in 1992, when I first worked at the league, they had very little background information on the history of the game and players. They were just the bare bones of it. And much of the information that had been recorded had been recorded inaccurately. So one of my tasks was to try to encourage the league to set up a proper database, and that took some years before that actually happened, but we eventually got that underway. And I established a network. I don't know whether you've ever heard of the organisation which is called the Australian Football Heritage Group, which consists of historians in Australian football, specifically the 18 club historians, together with an umpires historian, someone who's interested in country football in Victoria, someone who has a similar interest in each of the other states. And that was the basis for the networking, where the historians of the clubs were able to sort of go back through newspapers online to gather information and look at the old minute books of their own clubs to correct a lot of the inaccurate information that had previously been recorded. And so that sort of culminated in the records that we have today. Craig, you may be aware of a website called AFL Tables.
I use that one all of the time. Yes, when I do club previews, I will use that one to create like trivia questions for when I have a supporter from the Cats or from Adelaide or whatever to come on. I'll use that to find questions that I ask in like a little fun set of trivia questions for that supporter from that particular club. Yep.
Yes. So even though it has the AFL title, it isn't controlled by the league in any way. But I cooperate with that organisation to help them maintain the records.
Okay, and the AustralianFootball.com website. Oh, I'm very familiar with this one. The very colorful one up the top. Yeah, this is okay. I didn't realize that this was the Heritage Group that did this, but that makes complete sense. Yeah, I've had this site bookmarked for 7 years now. I use this one all the time. Yes. It's a wonderful site.
Are you aware of Rhett Bartlett, the son of the great Richmond player Kevin Bartlett?
I have not. I don't think I've heard that name before.
He has a he controls the Richmond website that has a historic content.
Okay.
It's called Tigerland Archive, and he has a lot to do with AFL tables and some of the other websites in helping them gather information.
So, once you got this position, how long did it take before you were able to put all of the data into a position where you were satisfied that you had accurate information now, that you could put that out there with confidence that this is what actually happened in the history of our game?
We would be going back to the early 2000s, probably about 2002 or 3, that we eventually were able to put into place an adequate database. However, I must emphasise that we're improving the amount of information and the accuracy of some of the information all the time. There's always something extra coming up. A good example of that relates to the great Captain Blood Jack Dyer, the great
that is a name
Tigers
I'm familiar
player
with.
of the night. So you'd know what impact he's had on football. And Rhett Bartlett made a discovery about some inaccurate information about one of Jack's supposed matches back in 1935 from memory, where all the records indicated that Jack had played in this particular match. But we found a small newspaper item that highlighted the fact that Jack, after being selected in this particular match at Punt Road Oval, took the field and was doing what we'd call the warm-up.
Right.
And one of the trainers came out to him and said, Jack, we've just had a phone call from a member of your family saying that someone at home is quite ill. And Jack made the immediate decision not to play.
Okay.
So he ran from the field and quickly organised for someone to take his place in the selected team, and he went home. But all the newspapers except one hadn't picked up the fact that he wasn't playing.
Wow.
So we had to remove a match from his career total.
Okay.
So taking it back from 312 to 311.
Okay.
So there are all sorts of things like that always occurring, where little minor changes like that need to be made from time to time.
Well, I thought you were going to tell me that he ended up having to leave to go work the night shift at the Carlton Brewery.
Yes. Oh dear. Yeah, well, he certainly didn't mind a drop of beer, that's for sure.
So, you have spent a lifetime being a Cats supporter, not a Pivotonian supporter, but which as you mentioned off air, that was the name that they had until 1923, I believe you said. So 100 years ago that name changed. But which we were talking about that being the same year that Vegemite was introduced as well. But you have this streak, which we're going to talk about, which began in 1963, but you did not go to your first Geelong game in 1963. You were going to games prior to that, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
In fact, I would have been taken.
Go ahead.
I would have been taken to my first game by my parents, who moved into the Geelong area when I was a 3-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember them telling me that they used to take me to the footy in those days, but I would take no interest at all in the game. All I would be interested in doing would be to go and buy a hot dog or play chasey with the kids and not watch the footy.
Well,
and so that pattern continued for a number of years until I was about 12 or 13, and then just by accident suddenly took an interest in footy and the Cats in particular. And so I started a sequence of going to every home game in Geelong from early in the 1958 season until 1963, before I started the sequence of all matches.
Well, and that was a little bit easier to do when it was still the VFL, because you were not, it was not a terribly long drive to get to the parks in Melbourne.
Correct. That's right.
Even though for some reason Collingwood and Richmond can never seem to find their way to Geelong anymore. Yes, I've learned to accept it, but it's the one thing that my American brain has had a hard time wrapping my head around, is the Cats playing a home game or playing multiple home games at the opponent's park. That sort of thing. If I've joked, and I don't know how much you may know about the NFL, but I've joked. I said, that if you had told the Philadelphia Eagles fans that since the New York Giants football stadium was larger, the Eagles were going to have to go play their home game at the Giants stadium in New Jersey, right across the river. And I've joked, I said, Eagles supporters would go to New Jersey and burn down the stadium so they could still play their game at home. They would never stand for that. I mean, now I've learned to accept that, but it's just that one of those things that just, it is mind-boggling still to this day. But are
you aware that Geelong played a home game against Carlton at the Sydney Cricket Ground in 1903?
I had no idea about that. No, first of all, I didn't realize that the SCG was that old, but I guess looking at some of the structures there, it kind of makes sense.
So the circumstances were that Carlton was scheduled to play Geelong in Geelong early in the 1903 season. And the Carlton team was travelling by train down to Geelong. And about halfway through the journey, the train suddenly came to a halt and didn't move. And the Carlton players and officials were wondering what's going on here. Has the train broken down or what's happened? So eventually they made contact with the conductor, who stated that the railway crew had decided to have a snap strike. So the players weren't going to be taken any further down the track. So the match had to be postponed, obviously. So no match in Geelong. And the league then had the quandary, well, how are we going to refixture this match on a different date? And when they went to do that, they found that the Geelong home ground had been pre-booked for the season for local matches, etc. So there was no chance of them playing the match in Geelong during the home and away season later on. So the league decided that to promote the game, they would reschedule it to be played in Sydney. And so that's what happened. Geelong versus Carlton in Sydney, 1903, in front of about 10 to 12,000 people. And that was how it all unfolded.
By that point in time, was Sydney a hotbed for rugby? And I'm not that familiar with the history of rugby, but was rugby prevalent at that point in time?
Well, the rugby league competition was first properly organised in 1908, just a handful of years after that.
Okay.
But it certainly was starting to establish itself in Sydney at that stage, yes. And it's interesting that the travel arrangements, Carlton travelled by ship to Sydney and Geelong travelled by train. And I know Geelong played a couple of exhibition matches against country teams on the way up and also on the way back.
Okay. And Carlton did not have that luxury because it was not that big of a ship.
No.
No. But well, and think about that. Had they realized the success of what they had there in Sydney, and again, they were not looking at a national competition at that point in time. The VFL was not looking to morph into the AFL in 1903. But if in a parallel universe, if that was the case, you could still have South Melbourne in Victoria, and you could have a whole separate, Sydney club, the Sydney Opera Houses. I'm not sure what they would call them, but the Sydney bridges, because they got some fancy bridges in Sydney, that maybe they would have gotten a toehold in Sydney, 80 years earlier.
And another potential development, just 11 years later, in 1914, in that particular season, the football authorities decided to have a football carnival to be played in Sydney, where each state of Australia and also New Zealand, out of interest, took part in New Zealand didn't compete in that one. It was the earlier one. Forget about that part of it. But so the states of Australia each sent a team up to Sydney to compete in this football carnival. And while that was in progress over a period of a couple of weeks, the rugby league authorities and the Australian football authorities met on several occasions discussing the possibility of amalgamating the two codes, rugby league and Australian football. And it got a fair way down the track where it almost happened, but at the last moment it didn't go ahead. So that's...
that would have been... we talked a little bit about the Ostis game, off air before we started recording, but that would have been interesting because, I would love to, if there's information out there in terms of what proposals they had made in terms of how they were going to tweak the rules, but that would have been fascinating to read about that and see what the plans were for it in terms of how they were going to structure the game.
I'll make sure that you get the information on that. We've got quite a lot.
Terrific.
So just in a nutshell, if the code had gone ahead, it would have been played on a rectangular field with goal and behind posts, plus a crossbar, that hand passing would be done away with, and you would be permitted to throw the ball, but you wouldn't be obliged to throw it sideways or backwards. You could throw it in any direction.
Okay.
The tackling would be according to what happens in Australian football. And I think the team composition, it would have been 15 people per team, etc.
Okay.
But anyway, you'll get the full details of that later.
Cool. That's awesome. So, you said that, for like the first 6 or 8 years that you were being taken to Cats games, you weren't really interested in the game. You were the hot dogs and running around with your friends. And that makes sense because that sort of thing still happens today. I mean, I don't, especially at, like baseball stadiums here in the United States, they have little areas that, like little playgrounds in the stadiums for kids to go and play. I mean, I remember the first few times taking my kids to the game, they saw very little of the game. They saw, they spent most of the game in the playground that the club had set up in the stadium for them. So they, the popcorn, the cotton candy, the hot dogs, that was, the game was tertiary. It wasn't even secondary. They were more, they wanted to play and they wanted the snack food that went along with it. But it's, over time you started to develop an interest in the game. You started to pay attention. Do you remember what your first memory of the game that wasn't running around or wasn't the hot dog aspect? Do you remember that first memory of the game, of the earliest game that you went to?
Yes, it was against Richmond at Cardinia Park, and one of the players taking part was a fellow called Fred Ledoux, French name, Ledeux, who turns out to be the maternal grandfather of Tom Hawkins.
Wow.
And Fred's wife, Pam, taught with me at Highton Primary School. And Pam's brother played for Geelong. You probably come across the name, Brian Brushfield, who played during the 1960s. And her first cousin was another Geelong player, Terry Callan, who sadly missed out on playing in the 1963 grand final because of a knee injury that he sustained just a couple of weeks before the final started that year.
Oh, that's
So
unfortunate.
Geelong is a small town when you think about it, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is. Yeah. Well, it's one of those things that looking at it, having been following the game now for a number of years, it's something that I think gives Geelong an interesting advantage over the other clubs in Victoria, because they are off the beaten path. And yes, there are a few 100,000 people in Geelong, but it is still kind of out of the way, much quieter than the busyness of Melbourne. And I think it's something that is something that is attractive to some players. And I've argued, and I've made I've mentioned this to other people, during the podcast. I said that this is something that, in a way, if they ever begin to find some success, Gold Coast might be able to tap into this same kind of thing. It's kind of off the beaten path. It's it's just down the road from Brisbane. It's you're going to be a big fish in a kind of small footy pond, if you will, there, where you're going to have some anonymity, and people, or like in Geelong, that, as you said, the family tree is such that so many players have are related to people who've been there before, that yes, running into Tom Hawkins or running into somebody else, it's not that big of a deal.
That's right.
Yeah. It's
And
I have a real quickly, I have a mate that's a Port Adelaide supporter, and he lives right near Port's training ground, and he goes into the same coffee shop every Monday morning, and it's been tradition that it's the same coffee shop that Kenny Hinckley goes into. And
Yes.
between the two of them, it's become tradition that on the days that Port Adelaide wins, the weekend before, that this mate of mine buys Ken Hinckley's coffee for him, and on days when they've lost, Ken Hinckley buys his coffee for him.
Isn't that a delightful connection?
It's really just, as I said, it's something that we could learn from here, and it's even like with the local footy. Yes, we have high school sports here, but we don't have that footy club or a sport of any kind that is basically from now Auskick up through the senior level, the Colts and seniors and that sort of thing, and now the girls playing as well. That is the hub around which the wheel of that community rotates. Those small country towns and such. That club it's the focus of that community. It's the pride and joy of that community.
And talk along that theme, have you heard the hilarious story about Joel Selwood about midnight after last year's grand final?
I don't think I have.
Okay. So as you know, he had a highly memorable day, grand final day.
Yes, he did.
With that wonderful gesture with Gary Ablett's young son before the match, and with the water boy, Sam, after the match, letting him put the premiership medallion around his neck.
Right.
And as you would appreciate, the players and officials celebrated well into the night after the grand final, firstly at the MCG and then going back to Geelong to Cardinia Park to celebrate further there.
Mm-hmm.
And Joel, being a very controlled person, only had 2 beers during the whole of the celebrations and was in a fit state to drive home to Barwon Heads, just out of Geelong. So he headed off and arrived at Barwon Heads around about 12:30 a.m.
Okay.
Early in the morning. And he reached a service station. And he thought to himself, this service station serves very good food. I've hardly eaten today. I've had a really hectic day.
Yes, he has.
I think I'll stop and I'll grab something to eat before I go to bed.
Mm-hmm.
So he got out of his car, closed the door of his car, and suddenly realised he'd locked himself out of his car.
Oh, no.
And he's thinking to himself, well, I've got a spare key, but it's at home.
Mm-hmm.
If I walk home, it'll take me half an hour, another half hour to walk back because my wife's not home. I wonder if I can ask someone in the service station if they could do me a favour. So I walked in and there was just a handful of customers there. So in a rather embarrassed way, he sort of said, well, look, I've done something silly here. I've locked myself out of my car. Does anyone live in, and he described the area of Bowen Heads where he lived. And this lady put her hand up and said, yes, I live quite close to that. And she obviously didn't recognise who was asking the question.
Okay.
She didn't realise it was Joel Selwood.
Wow.
So she was a bit hesitant because she didn't sort of know this fellow.
Yeah.
And the service station manager was in the background and he sort of said, oh, yeah, that'll be okay. I know this bloke. Yeah, that's fine. So she decided she'd drive him home to get his key and then drive him back. So on the way, they're driving along. And to be polite to Joel, without knowing who he was, she said, what sort of a day have you had? And he said, quite good, thank you. Oh, where were you working? At the MCG. Oh, she said, I know who you are. But the funny part was that before that happened, Joel said to her, what sort of a day have you had? Before she recognised him. And she said, oh, terrible. She said, I've been working in the Bowen Heads Hotel as a waitress and it's been hectic. You know, the grand final today, I didn't get a lunch break. I've only just knocked off. I'm exhausted. I didn't even get to see any of the grand final before she realised it was Joel.
Wow. Well, I saw somebody, and I don't remember who it was, that and I don't remember if it was the Cats or not. I think it was the Cats, though, that had, showed back up like the next day still in uniform, still wearing the uniform, still the jumper and the boots on, and was wearing the medallion and such, and just, and I guess when you've won that, you certainly want to embrace that. It's just and relish in that, because I when I was looking at your streak, because you attended, if I read the number correctly, 1,294 consecutive Cats games.
Yes,
which is amazing, and that streak would not have ended had COVID not taken place.
Correct.
So do you give yourself a pass on that, because it wasn't that you were not wanting to go to the game, but the governments were basically saying you could not attend? Did you put a little asterisk there as being the historian and the statistician, saying, okay, I'm not going to really count these games when they went into the hubs. I still go to all of them. Okay.
No, that hasn't occurred to me so much.
Okay.
I've missed a couple of matches since.
Okay.
Since normal operations resumed, but that was sort of through illness and different things like that. But I know I'm proud of my streak, but I'm certainly not trying to say that those other matches don't count in the streak.
Well, and what's interesting is that first year of your streak, they win the grand final. And do you think to yourself? Go ahead. I'll ask my follow up. And
okay, now I don't know whether you know the circumstances of me missing round 10, 1963 due to illness. That was when Geelong played Fitzroy at the old Brunswick Street Oval in Melbourne. And I remember being in bed ill, listening to the radio description of the match. But what was remarkable is that Geelong was beaten by Fitzroy that day, which turned out to be Fitzroy's only win for 2 years.
Wow.
Spread over 1963 and 64. And the talk was at that stage of the season, Geelong has no hope of winning the premiership after being beaten by the Wooden Spooner, that they'll be lucky to make the finals. But of course, as it unfolded, they recovered and went on to win the flag.
No, but so they win it. Are you thinking to yourself, okay, I've got something good going here? We won it this year. We're going to come back and win it again. And it's not until 2007 that they won another one?
Correct.
So we're talking about 44 years between premierships there. Did you ever think to yourself, or did anybody ever say to you, why are you going to the footy every week? They're not winning anything.
Yes, that's true. However, I lived through probably the most entertaining era in the club's history without a premiership. I'd say from when Malcolm Blight started coaching Geelong in 1989. They finished up losing the grand final in an exciting match against Hawthorn in that season, and then subsequently playing in several other grand finals in a short space of time. But the style of football that they played during that era was just amazing, inspired by Gary Ablett Sr., who was at the peak of his form at that stage.
Well, and it's funny you mentioned his name, because as I'd spoken to you before we started recording, when I talked to Barry Cheatley, and he said, I know, let me know who you want to talk to, that sort of thing. I said, well, because I said, he kind of alluded, he said, well, who's your white whale, with the Moby Dick reference. And I said, well, I would love to, talk to, as you just mentioned, Gary Ablett Sr. He said, okay, who else would you like to talk to? which, and again, I know that's not going to happen, but I would love the opportunity to talk to him, to talk to his son, and I've not tried to reach out to his son either, but it's, I've started to, kind of find a bit of a niche, doing this, because I do like the preview episodes, and I'll talk about the games as they've been played, but I'm never going to be so bold as to say that, here I've only been following the game for 6 or 7 years, and that I know more about the game than people who have grown up the game and with the game and have spent 40 years or 50 years following the game. I don't want to insult their intelligence by trying to, tell them, well, I know more about your game, because I don't. But what I do like doing is having conversations like you and I are having right here, where we get to peel things back a little bit and learn stuff about people, and they get to tell fascinating and fun stories that other people maybe haven't heard. That's the thing that I think that people who listen to the podcast really enjoy, and hopefully the people that come on enjoy doing that as well. But it's just, I love doing this. I mean, I actually talk to more people in Australia than I do that live on my own street.
There we go.
I really do. I really do.
Yes.
It's amazing. So you've been a statistician. What do you think? As somebody who has studied the numbers and compiled the numbers, what do you think is the most unappreciated statistic in footy, and what's the most misunderstood stat in footy?
Well, I'll start with the latter. I think the most misunderstood stat, or overestimated one, is number of disposals by players, where there's an assumption, because someone has had 40 touches, they must be among the best players on the field. But that isn't necessarily the case, where you can have people who waste the ball, or just don't put the ball to advantage. And as far as the most important one, I think you'd have to say goals scored.
Well, yeah,
goals win matches.
Yeah, but is there one you think is underappreciated that people don't, that to learn, because as you said, disposals don't necessarily tell you if this person is a great player or not. But is there a stat that would maybe reinforce just how good a player who doesn't necessarily get the credit that they should be getting?
Yes, probably a good example is current player Brian Myers, number 32. Who has a most unusual kicking style.
Yes, he does.
How he sort of kicks the ball round the corner. And he currently leads the competition for season 2023 for score assists, and in particular goal assists. But I think that's quite an important role or feature of stats, particularly of someone playing on the forward line.
Right.
And of course, Tommy Hawkins features very prominently with that stat too. I was speaking to his grandmother recently, and this is Pam Ledeur, and she said, well, even though he's my grandson, I feel his value to the team is being underestimated by people. They only look at how many goals he kicked. They don't look at how many goals he passes on to teammates, or
Well,
goal opportunities he
well,
passes on to teammates.
That's funny you mentioned that, because I think that, that the Cats forward structure is one of the most selfless forward structures in the comp. They are not afraid to give the ball up to a teammate who's in a better position to kick a goal.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that I think is something that I've spoken to people who are Melbourne supporters about, and I'm just going to mention the player by name, Bailey Fritsch, who is kind of like a black hole when it, if he gets the ball inside 50, nobody else is going to get it unless they're picking it up to kick it in, if it's gone out on the full or if it's been kicked as a behind. But otherwise, if it's inside 50, he's probably going to be kicking it at the goal.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true.
So I would guess his number of goal assists are rather small. Yeah, they are. Yeah. So, throughout your career, what has been the most rewarding thing that you got from working with the VFL, AFL? What was the most rewarding thing for you?
I think it's making or maintaining contact with players of the past and families of the players of the past. It's amazing how much value I place on learning about those identities. A good example is currently at the AFL, we have two people who've been working on the same project, say the feasibility of Tasmania coming into the competition, and a number of other associated projects. Their respective names are Sam Graham. You'll be familiar with his brother Ben.
Heard that name.
Who obviously played for the Cats and also played American football. So Sam is one employee, and the other one is David. I've got to stop and think of it. David Grosman is his name.
Okay.
Now, Sam and Ben's grandfather, Jack Graham, was a great old South Melbourne player from the 1930s and 40s. And he had similar kicking ability to Ben, could kick the ball 70 or 80 metres. And David Grosman's grandfather, Don Grosman, was a teammate of Jack Graham at South Melbourne and played close to 100 matches together.
Wow.
So it's amazing how you've got that pair of AFL employees who work in the same department, whose grandfathers were great teammates and friends, and just came together by chance.
It's amazing, and it is a very close, tight-knit community in footy. Because you have a lot of people who that have played the game that go on to other roles, whether it be in coaching, whether it be working at AFL house, that type of thing. It's that they're helping to keep this wonderful game. And I think it's the greatest game on the planet, quite frankly. I think it's superior to our code of football here in the United States. I really do. Now, I still, like I said, as I told you, I still watch the Cleveland Browns play each week, but I don't spend the rest of the day watching the other 14 or 15 NFL games that are going on. They don't interest me.
Yes.
But I watch every game of the AFL every week. I've not watched Melbourne and Collingwood from this morning. I will watch that one tomorrow before I go to work. I do know the result of it, though.
Another fascinating little fact: you'd be aware of Ed Richards, the red-headed boy who plays for the Bulldogs.
The Bulldogs, yep.
His grandfather was Ron Richards, a very good Collingwood player of the 1950s.
Okay.
Brother of Lou Richards, one of the famous football identities. You'd be aware of Lou, not only in his role as a very good Collingwood player, but also as a high-profile media person for many, many years. So Ed is related to them. And I don't know whether you've ever heard of the Panham family, who were closely associated with Collingwood back many, many years earlier, going right back to the 1890s.
That's not what I'm familiar with,
So you've got that dynasty that goes back 130 years, and Ed Richards is still carrying on that tradition.
So was he not, as far as father-son thing, it wouldn't be grandfather or grandson then?
No, I think Ed was hoping it was going to be, but I think he's happy playing for the Bulldogs.
And he's a little dinged up right now, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think he's played the last couple of weeks.
Yes, a dreaded hamstring injury.
Yes. Yeah, he was on my fantasy team, so I've had to replace him on there. But I did have Tex Walker on my team last week, so that worked out pretty well.
Oh, that worked out very well.
Oh, wow. So before we wrap up, I had one more footy related question, then a couple of other ones. And again, you've watched, well over 1,400 games in person. What is maybe the greatest performance that you saw from a player in person in your lifetime? What's that thing that you're never going to forget about that particular game with that particular player?
It would have to be Gary Ablett Sr. playing against Richmond at the MCG during the early 90s, when he played the first quarter and a bit as a wingman, and finished the game with 14 goals.
Wow.
So as I say, he played as, if you like, a midfielder for 30% of the game, yet still finished with 14 goals.
And didn't he start out his career playing in defence?
Not so much defence, but more as a wingman half forward.
Okay. Okay.
So I think
he was with Hawthorn for a year or two, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't he, early on?
Yes, he was. Yes, and didn't like the city life in Melbourne, and then started playing country football in northeastern Victoria, and the Myrtleford Football Club was where that was, and the Myrtleford football coach had played briefly with Geelong a few years earlier, a fellow called Greg Nichols, and he recommended that Geelong should have another look at him. And so he signed with the Cats, and the rest is history.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So, all right, the last couple of things I have for you, but what are you most proud of in your life? You've done a lot of absolutely wonderful things. What is that one thing that, well, you may not actually. I don't think you're the kind of person that would ever go out and say, "Hey, look what I have done." But when you have that reflective moment, when you sit down with a cup of tea, or and you're just sitting on the patio and you're just thinking about things quietly, what is that thing that you just think about yourself? I did that, and that was pretty awesome.
I think it's the proper recording of the history of football at AFL level, going back to from 1897 onwards, both from a competition point of view and Geelong Football Club point of view, where I've just been able to coordinate the recording of such information, where it had never been recorded in that way previously by anyone.
That's awesome. I'm going to send you an email to a link to a podcast that I don't know and their website's not working right now. I will have to find it, but there's a couple of gentlemen, and I think there's a lady that's involved with it as well, that does a podcast where each episode covers 1 year of the VFL, and they're working towards the present day. But they went back and started in 1897. So they've probably delved into the statistics that you have put together, but they go through and talk about every season and dig into specific games of that season. And it's just, if you're, as you being somebody who loves history of the game, it's fascinating the amount of work that they have done to prepare this, and I'm sure that they have dug into the data that you have helped to compile in order to do this. So I don't know if you've encountered that, but I'm going to find their link because their old website is not working right now, and I don't know what has happened to it. But when I find that, I will email that to you. But um,
I'll look forward to that.
okay.
One person I should mention in giving me great assistance in compiling the information is a fellow called Stephen Rogers. I don't know whether you've seen one of his publications called Every Game Ever Played, which documents quarter-by-quarter scores of every match at AFL level from 1897 through to about the 1990s, when the last edition was published, or the most recent edition was published. And Stephen is a wizard on being able to dig up information such as players' dates of birth from long ago, and keeping track on players who've passed away progressively.
Mm-hmm.
He does a lot of work unpaid to help me in that sort of situation.
Wow. I mean, it is a labor of love for you, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
That is, it's so impressive because, and while I don't want to, it sounds so wrong to think that it is something that's kind of thankless, but you're not doing it for the publicity necessarily. You're doing it for the love of the game. And,
absolutely.
But I guess I don't know this. Have you ever received what I think would probably be richly deserved recognition for the yeoman's work that you have done to put all of this information in order?
Yes, I've received a couple of awards along those lines. One is called the R.J. Hickey Award, which is awarded annually to someone who's contributed significantly, not just to the Geelong Football Club, but to football in general.
Okay.
And the other one is the Jack Titus Award. I was fortunate enough to receive that a couple of years ago for general services to football, named in honour of Jack Skinny Titus, who was a long-serving teammate of Jack Dyer at Richmond.
Okay. Well, that is it's just fascinating, and I love digging into the numbers, and I one stat that I've noticed, and I've pulled this up in a number of times when I'm asking questions of like the supporters from different clubs when we preview their clubs at the beginning of the season. There's a statistic that we don't have anything like this in American sport. We don't have anything like the 1%ers.
Okay.
We don't have that, and I've said to the people, and I certainly want to ask you this before we close out. I've thought that could, if it wasn't called the 1%er, it could be called the doing the right thing stat.
Yes.
Okay, because that seems like that's what it is. It's shepherding. It's any number of different things to allow your club to have success.
And a good example of that is where players deliberately lead to a particular part of the field and call for the ball to make their direct opponent feel obliged to follow them, to try to prevent them from getting the ball, with the player himself knowing that the ball's not going to be kicked to him, but he's opened up space behind him
for somebody else to come in,
someone else to lead into. I think that's a good example of that.
That's a great point. That is a great point. Well, sir,
where they might be exhausted.
Where
they might be exhausted and just had nearly all the steam taken out of them, but they found that little bit of adrenaline to just force themselves to do it.
It's fascinating, and like I said, I can't thank you enough for the work that you have done to put this data together, because I do dive in and look back, especially, you mentioned the log, and I'm drawing a blank on the name of it right now. I mean, I have it, the AFL tables, which are just, something that I jump into quite a bit, because I do want to go back and read up on, as much as I can. I may never watch the games, but I can at least see the numbers from some of these people, that you've talked about, and I can go back and learn more about, for example, a Barry Cheatley, and see how he performed in different games and that sort of thing. Now, of course, there's no record there of coaches getting punched in the nose, but it's but it is, but there's also no record of of him bringing elephants to the grounds also, which I remember him telling me that during our conversation last year. But I can't thank you enough, sir, for taking time out of your afternoon to sit down and chat. This has been thoroughly delightful, and I hope those of you who are listening have learned something more about the game, and appreciate the effort that you and also Mr. Rogers have put forth to try to ensure that the legacy of the game is as accurate as it can possibly be. And
Thank you, Craig.
And I tip my cap to you, sir, for that, because it's absolutely awesome that you have done that.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate that. And ladies and gentlemen, my guest has been Col Hutchinson, and sir, this has been an absolute pleasure. And again, I cannot thank you enough, sir. And I hope you have an absolutely wonderful, wonderful afternoon.
And enjoy the forthcoming match over in Adelaide.
I absolutely will do that. It's going to be a heck of a match. I will tell you though, if I was starting a club and they said, well, you're allowed to take 3 players from one club's forward line, 3 players from another club's defensive structure, and 3 players from a club's midfield to start your club, I'm going to Port Adelaide and I'm taking Butters, Rosie, and Horn Francis for my midfield. I mean, and if I can't get them, I'm probably going to Gold Coast to go get Anderson, Rowell, and Tuke Miller.
Just because that's a pretty good trio too.
Yes, it's yeah, it is. And so before we go, any predictions on the rest of the year? What are the Cats playing finals this year?
I think it will all depend on what happens this week against Port Adelaide. But if they can win, I'm optimistic that they can get to the finals, and hopefully they're at the peak of their form at that stage, and you never know what might happen.
Well, we saw that happen last year. So, and and again, they had they basically had to run the gauntlet on the road, even though they were the number 1 club. They won the minor premiership, but I'm cautiously optimistic, but I think deep down, and you would certainly know this better than I would it serve the game well if Gold Coast finds their way into the 8?
Exactly the same thought was just running through my mind. I would certainly have them as my second team, and I reckon it would be great for the code.
Yeah, because they have invested so much in that club, and to finally get a positive result, if you will, that here is our club. We finally made the 8, and I think at this point in time, who's going to want to play them? Because they are pesky. You've got a great ruck who can put the ball wherever it needs to go. And it's just it's a fun club to watch play.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, they got us earlier this year, so
yes, they did.
Yes, they did. Well, sir, you have a great afternoon and evening. It is about 20 minutes after 1 in the morning here, so I am actually getting up at about 5 o'clock in the morning because I'm doing another interview at, I believe, 6:30 or 7 o'clock tomorrow morning.
I thought you'd be squeezing in a visit to a nightclub in between.
Yes, I'm gonna go work my night job at the brewery. No, I'm going to sleep very well tonight. But I had somebody. I'm waiting to actually hear back. I'm going to check my email to see if they've emailed me back. I'm gonna and he has not emailed me yet, so it may not happen tomorrow. But I'll set my clock. I already have my clock set. My coffee maker is ready to go with regular coffee, not decaf. But yeah, so we're going to be talking about. He had a proposal on how to try to bring some parity to the game by adjusting the salary cap based upon where you finished on the ladder the previous season.
Oh, okay.
It's a unique proposal that he was making, and I had somebody that I talked to earlier today that also discussed, the gentleman from Brazil, about, and I don't know how this would work, doing like the European soccer leagues do, and that, like the two clubs that finish at the bottom of the ladder, that they get dumped back into the VFL or the Sandful or whatever, and they have to fight their way back into the league. I don't know how that would work with the AFL because of membership and things like that. I argued with them. I said you would probably have to go to having clubs with club specific owners for that sort of thing to happen. Because if I'm a member of a club and my club gets relegated down to the VFL or the Waffle or the Sandful, I might not invest my money in being a member of that side again, which
that
becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy of doom.
Yes, it certainly would have its challenges, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would. But I don't want to go down that avenue too much further here. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. And Mr. Hutchinson, sir, again, I thank you so very much for your time today.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Craig.
Cheers. All right, Mr. Hutchinson, thanks so very much, sir. It was an absolute pleasure to speak with you. I truly enjoyed this. We could have spoken for hours if you would have been willing to do that. Not to say that you weren't, but I would love the opportunity to sit down and talk with you again because you have so many wonderful stories. And again, a big thank you to Barry Cheatley for helping me get into contact with you. Now, ladies and gentlemen, look out for one another. Check up on your friends and family. Make sure they're okay. Take them out for that coffee. Head to Bunnings and get that snag. Get out and support some local footy if you get the opportunity to do so as well. Remember that you can find everything related to my podcast over at my website at yankonthefooty.com. You can get on the mailing list there, and I hope you do. So when a new episode comes out, you'll have it in your inbox within a few minutes of when it's released. If you enjoy the podcast, I do hope you'll leave a review there or over on Apple or Spotify. There are links right on my website which will take you there to allow you to do that. It's a really good tool that I can use to help encourage new listeners to check out the podcast. So if you have some time, you'd want to do that, that'd be great. Again, if you want to help out the podcast, you can do that at my Redbubble store page or click on that Buy Me a Coffee button over on my website as well. You can leave me a voicemail there if you'd like to do that as well. If you got an idea for a guest, if you'd be a great guest, if you know somebody, I would love to talk to them. Now, at the present time, my schedule is a little screwy because I'm typically working my time 11:30 a.m. until 10 p.m. on Wednesdays and Thursdays, which would be about 1:30 in the afternoon Thursday through, 22 and 14, 36 till about noon on Saturday, your time. Yeah, noon on Friday, I should say, your time. Might be Saturday because it's back-to-back days. And then I'm working early, like 6 a.m. my time until 2:30 in the afternoon on Saturdays and Sundays. But Mondays and Tuesdays, my time, late Sunday evenings, certainly I could sit down to do an interview. I'm trying to line up several of them. I've got a list of people that I need to get in touch with. I just have not lined some things up. I have one gentleman who I've had some great chats with online. He's got a great he's got a great proposal on how to deal with some of the issues with regards to making the league have a little bit more parity, giving clubs options and opportunities to become more successful more quickly. And I'm just trying to line up a time to sit down with him. He's in Adelaide. And I hope he's listening, and check your email because I just emailed you again a couple days ago. But again, folks, look out for one another. Remember, you can reach me at Yank_on Twitter, a Yank on the Footy podcast on Facebook, a Yank on the Footy on Instagram, Craig Wessels on LinkedIn and on Facebook as well, or at a yankonthefooty@gmail.com. I love being able to chat with you. Ladies and gents, I appreciate the kind words. Those of you who reached out to wish me a happy birthday, thank you for that. That was wonderful. And as always, may your dribble kick never, ever hit that post. I will catch you later. And this has been episode 273 of A Yank on the Footy, my chat with Col Hutchinson. Thanks for listening, everybody. I do hope you'll share the episode with your friends and family. And until next time, goodbye.